Thanks so much for hopping on. So just as you look at the quarter for NVIDIA next week, what are a couple of things that you and your team are going to be looking at for a sense of not just their own business, but what NVIDIA can tell us, let's say, about the broader AI spend right now?
Well, I mean, NVIDIA is by far the largest supplier in the market. So I think what they tell us is going to really be a good indicator of where AI spending is right now. And I think they're going to have very positive things to say. So we've done checks in Taiwan. The Taiwanese supply chain is continuing to see upward momentum. Had conversations with people selling into their products in the US. The same thing. We've heard it publicly from the CSPs, right? They are spending more on AI. You've heard from companies like Supermicro, where they're expecting sales to roughly double Q on Q, tied to better shipments of pretty much NVIDIA AI racks. And so I think NVIDIA is going to have really positive things to say about Q3, Q4.
You know, I'm curious how you think about the stock at this point. And I ask because when you look at NVIDIA on a valuation basis, we always have this conversation. It's pretty reasonable, especially against a lot of its peers, and really where the stock has been over the last couple of years. It's grown into that valuation and more than in some cases. How do you think about just the stock today, what you're paying for as an investor? Again, trading about 28 times, which compared to what else you can see out there is not crazy.
Yeah, no, so it's not expensive on an earnings basis. The concern that's been around for the last couple months is just the revenue numbers are getting so big that they require so much spend from these companies putting in data centers, and where's the funding going to come from? And that's, I mean, that is a legitimate concern. Having said that, it's a bigger concern if there's not revenue generated. And if we had this discussion a year ago today, you would be pointing out the fact that a lot of this infrastructure is going to supporting training, which doesn't generate revenue. But now what we're starting to see is that inference workloads are building. Those are what generate revenue. It's what generates profit. And it should be what funds that debt that's being used to pay for these data center buildouts.
And then thinking about NVIDIA specifically and their product roadmap, what are you expecting to see in terms of the discussion around Blackwell sales versus thinking ahead to where Rubin fits in and just NVIDIA's own product velocity here?
I think at this particular venue, right, their Q3 earnings, we're going to hear a whole lot more about Blackwell. With Rubin, it's really starts as a second half 26 story. I think that we see the larger revenue get generated in the 2027 timeframe. So it's still a bit out. Rather, where I think we're going to get tangible, better results or better expectations is the B300, right? So their next iteration of Blackwell, where it sounds like things are ramping really well.
And then finally, just on the China side of it, we still see that story just a little bit, just unclear, I guess. I feel like I kind of lose track of exactly where we sit, other than it doesn't seem like NVIDIA has any visibility into sales in China. How are you thinking about that part of the story right now with those, non-realized revenues, let's call them, now seemingly comfortably into the tens of billions of dollars?
Yeah, I think everyone's taken China revenues out of numbers. And so if at any point China becomes an opportunity again, that's all a bonus for NVIDIA. I think the other thing to think about, though, is one of the concerns had been that you'd end up with these dual tracks where you've got a China track and a US track, and that China would really offer other countries a path to AI if the US didn't. What we're starting to hear, particularly this week, you had the Wall Street Journal talking about the fact that China has some bottlenecks. And so, well, it's not a great thing that NVIDIA still can't sell into China. From an NVIDIA perspective, I think some of the concerns around might there be roadblocks in other countries, or could China potentially pick off some of the revenues in other geographies, that some of that fear should be dissipated.
All right, we'll leave it there. Matt Bryson with Wedbush. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Nvidia shares bouncing back this morning. The company is set to report its quarterly earnings after the close next Wednesday, November 19th. Our tech editor, Dan Howley, joins us with what to watch when those results come out. And Dan, part of this, we saw Jensen Huang recently make some comments that seemed to indicate an even rosier outlook than he had already. Are we going to hear potentially more about that with this earnings report?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what everyone's looking for, right? I mean, this is the bellwether for the AI trade, and whether they beat expectations or miss expectations, you can expect a cavalcade of knock-on effects for different AI stocks. And so there's a number of kind of threads here with the kind of Nvidia earnings report. The first is, this is the first report that we're seeing since SoftBank unloaded their $5.8 billion worth of stake in the company. They obviously did that to kind of pay for their own AI endeavors. They're working with OpenAI on that massive Stargate project, things along those lines. It's also the first we've heard from Nvidia since the AMD financial analyst day, where CEO Lisa Su had said that she believes that the total addressable market for AI data centers will be $1 trillion by 2030. And then also, just kind of somewhat related, but more related to the broader AI trade, is Michael Burry coming out and saying that he believed that some companies were exaggerating their earnings by kind of elongating the depreciation of some of their assets when it comes to their data centers. And so there's a number of, like I said, threads going on when it comes to this actual report. But by the numbers, we're expecting EPS of $1.25. That would be up 54% year over year, and revenue of $55.1 billion. That would be up 57%. Now, I just want to point out that it would be better than the prior quarter, Q2, which was up 55.6%. But Q1 2026, that was 69%. Q4 2025, that was 77%, and so on and so forth. And so,
in other words, it's sort of decelerate. We've seen gradually decelerating growth just because earlier on, when they were first getting into this business, I mean, the numbers were so eye-popping on a comparable basis.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just the law of large numbers, right? Yeah. You're just, they were starting off with the huge explosion in kind of from ChatGPT. Everybody said, "Oh, we got to get in this. Let's start plowing money into data centers," and Nvidia just blew up, right? And so now we're seeing that a slight, 50-something% growth. That ain't bad, right? I'm not gonna sneeze at that, but it's not 100-something, 200-something%. And so I do think that after each earnings, we have seen kind of a little bit of pullback when it comes to the stock price, just the immediate reaction, and I think it's based on those kind of insane expectations. But we'll have to see what's going on. China obviously is still an outstanding issue. They're not modeling any revenue from China. They've said that now for the past few quarters. There's really no movement as far as that goes. Right. Blackwell was supposed to be potentially going there, but it doesn't look like it is.
Yeah, are we going to get sort of the percentage of their revenue that's coming from the hyperscalers at this point?
So yeah, that's honestly one of the biggest questions, right? Every quarter they say roughly 50% of their revenue comes from the hyperscalers. And so obviously that's huge. They continue to build out. Meta is basically, throwing all caution to the wind, it seems, when it comes to their spending. Not that, Amazon and Google and Microsoft aren't. It's just that, we heard Mark Zuckerberg say, "Hey, if we're wrong about building it out now, we'll use it eventually." So, okay, cool. That makes sense. But, these companies are also working on building out their own chips. They're also working now with AMD. AMD is going to have a rack scale solution that they're rolling out with Oracle and OpenAI eventually, their Helios rack scale. And, that was something that NVIDIA had that AMD didn't. But now that brings in more competition. And, we've spoken about this before, but the kind of custom chips that companies have, whether that's, working with Broadcom or, Amazon with its own Trainium and Inferentium, and then Google with their TPUs. Microsoft has been, kind of thinking about that or working on that as well. And so, there's going to be more competition. The estimate is that NVIDIA still has 90% of the market, right? So, even if they had 75% of the market, they'd still be the dominant player.
Right.
It's just that, we're seeing this more competition, although frankly, we haven't seen any real impact on their revenue, their earnings, anything along those lines. And if Lisa Sue's right and that market continues to expand, that the TAM continues to expand, it'll raise all ships essentially.
Yes, at least that's the hope of everyone. Dan, thanks a lot. Looking forward to covering that with you next week. Appreciate it.